Hello, I'm Kevin Frender with Black Dog LED, and today we're doing a brief video on tips and tricks for starting seeds, specifically how to plant seeds. So the first thing you're going to want to do, of course, is get your pots, whatever size pots you need. Again, I don't recommend planting seeds in large pots like this. I would definitely recommend starting with small pots to begin with the exception of cucumbers, melons, and squash, which you should use a larger pot because they really don't like being transplanted, and they grow pretty quickly, so they need to start in a larger pot anyhow. So the first thing you're going to want to do is fill up your pots with soil. So when you're filling your pots up with soil, it's important that you don't have an excess of soil coming out the top. In fact, when you're done planting your seeds, ideally, you want to have about a 1/4 inch of space at the top of the pot, about like that is, because when you water them, you don't want to have to dribble water in very gingerly so that it doesn't roll off the top of the surface of the soil. You want there to be room to actually put water in your pot. And I know it's one of those mistakes that is very easy to make, is overfilling a pot with soil, but do that once and then you're paying for it every time you have to water your plants. So don't overfill your pots. Another thing to keep in mind though is that the soil is nice and loose when we put it in the pot, but it actually can compress, depending on the kind of soil, it can compress in the pot. So you actually want to make sure that your soil is packed down. Now you don't want to use a lot of force here, but you want to get it ideally packed in so that when you water it, it doesn't just settle down to the bottom of the pot either. And this is one of those things that trial and error, you will learn how much force you need to put down on the soil to pack it. But clearly here I now don't have quite enough soil in the pot. So I'm going to add just a little bit more, pack it down, maybe scrape some of that excess out so I've got room to water. And now I've got the pot pretty much ideal for planting the seeds. One thing I've seen a lot of people do is, instead of buying proper pots that were designed to be pots, which have proper drainage holes, and in fact the drainage holes on a properly designed pot are not completely on the bottom of the pot, they're up a little bit on the sides, or there's a notch in the pot as there is with these. That helps with proper drainage. I've seen a lot of people go get cheap cups from a store, punch holes in the bottom, and try and use those as pots. These were not designed as pots, they don't drain out, and one of the problems is if you punch the holes out, you end up with either plastic sticking out of the bottom like this, and then this doesn't sit properly and it wobbles and you've got a pot that's leaning at a funny angle. Or if you cut this stuff off, then when you put the pot down, it's completely flat and flush against whatever surface you're setting it on, so it doesn't drain properly. I highly recommend don't use these. They're pretty worthless. So seeds come in all different sizes. We have tiny tomato seeds up to something like a squash seed, which tend to be very large in comparison. And there's different tips and tricks for different size seeds. So these are Tromboncino squash seeds. If you've not tried Tromboncino squash, I highly recommend them. They're like, you use them like zucchini, but they're not as mushy basically. And they get very, very long as well. So for really large seeds, it's pretty easy to just pick one up with your hand and stick it in the soil. So, for example, if I'm planting 3 seeds in here, I can just set my seeds in. I typically put these in vertically. Doesn't matter really. But then you just push them in the soil. And a general rule of thumb is you want the seed to be covered by about as much soil as the seed is large. Now with really small seeds, things like tomato seeds, that's kind of tricky to get a really thin layer of soil on top. So a 1/4 inch certainly works there. But the larger the seed is, the deeper it goes in the soil. General rule of thumb. So after pushing these large seeds in, I'm just going to tap the soil down again, and then this pot's going to be ready to water. For smaller seeds, I actually recommend using a tool to make a little dimple in the soil surface so that when you're putting the seeds in the soil, they end up in the right place, because these small seeds are very difficult to work with. So what I'll do is make sure my soil is fairly compact there, and I just make a little dimple where I want to put the seeds. So I'm planning on putting 5 seeds in that pot. Again, 5 seeds in that pot. This way, when I do put the seeds in, they end up correctly spaced as I intended them to be in the pot, instead of all clumped right together, which makes it very difficult to divide them later if that's what you're doing. So for very small seeds, like tomato seeds, very small, I typically will pour them out into my hand just like this. Of course, you don't have to use your hand, but spread them out and very carefully pinch them, and then just put them in the spots that you had previously put in dimples for. And again, if you miss, you can always use a small tool to nudge the seed back in where you actually want it to go. Now that I have the seeds planted, I'm just going to gently tap down on the soil surface and then add just a little bit more for my small tomato seeds, and that's ready to water in. Now, one trick with watering stuff in is if you just try and pour water directly into the pot using a watering can, it can really disturb the soil surface, especially if the soil is fairly dry to start with. You end up moving a lot of soil around, and the seeds get moved around in that process as well. So instead of just trying to pour water in from a watering can, one of my tricks is to first use a spray bottle just filled with plain water. We just mist the surface of the soil and basically let the soil start getting wet there, let the water soak in, and that way when I come back with a watering can, it's not going to move the soil everywhere as long as I'm gentle with it. So after you have your seeds planted and watered in, you want to make sure that the pots have drained so that you're not putting them in a tray or a place where they're just going to be sitting in water. But when you're done with that, you want to keep them at a constant level of moisture. You don't want the pots to be too wet. You don't want them to dry out, because seedlings, as they're germinating, are very sensitive to that. So one trick you can do is get plastic wrap, put it over the tops of the pots. That helps hold the moisture in and keeps it at a constant level. Or you can use a clone dome like this, or these are also sometimes called seedling domes. They conveniently fit on the nursery trays, just like that, and they will help seal in the humidity as well and keep the pots evenly moist. So you want to keep your seedling, or your seeds rather, as they're germinating in a nice warm environment. Typically, the warmer the seeds are, the faster they germinate, up to a point. Oftentimes you will see on the seed packets themselves a recommended germination temperature, but for things like peppers and tomatoes and squash, I try and keep them about 80 to 82 degrees or so. And you definitely don't want to keep them completely in the dark either. Some seeds actually require exposure to light to germinate properly. Now, as soon as you see your seedlings pop out of the soil, as soon as they've germinated, you absolutely want to take them out from under the plastic wrap or out from under your clone dome and expose them to the actual regular environmental conditions, the full light that they're going to be receiving and the normal air without high humidity. One common mistake a lot of gardeners make when they're planting seeds and the seeds germinate is they assume, well, this is a little tiny baby plant, I've got to baby it and treat it extra soft and gentle, and that's actually counterproductive, because if you keep the humidity too high with a little seedling, as a little seedling, it actually can't handle that high humidity, and it's very susceptible to getting a disease called damping off, which is caused by mold that grows in high humidity. So to prevent that, as soon as your seeds germinate, you want to take them out from your clone dome or out from under the plastic wrap and expose them to full normal air. Not high humidity. You don't want to be misting them every day. You just want to get them out, and the seed will actually adapt, well, the seedling will actually adapt to the environment that it finds itself in as soon as it pops out of the soil. You don't have to worry about babying your seeds. It's also counterproductive to keep light levels low on seedlings because they're very hungry for energy. They just germinated, they're just getting started in life, and they need as much light as they can possibly get. If you have a low light level, the seed will actually grow taller looking for light because it's assuming that it is being shaded out by something that it needs to outgrow. So it will actually grow tall and leggy and weak, and then the stem will often bend and break on you and you end up killing your seedling. So give your plants, your seedlings, as soon as they come out of the soil, give them the full light level that they're going to be receiving. So in our next video, we'll show you how you can divide these seedlings into individual pots when they're large enough. But in the video coming up shortly, we'll show you how you can carefully divide them and transplant them into their own individual pots. Don't forget to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Happy gardening!